Hello and welcome back to Looking Forward, a weekly podcast of debate and discussion about politics and ideas. Today we reflect on the US election, its outcomes, its processes, and of course what it means. Is it the end of Western civilization, or is it just another way station on the very long history of democracy in the USA? What is democracy anyway? Is it just voting, or is it something much, much deeper than that? And of course we really want to work out what a potential Biden administration might actually look like. And of course, we'll be wondering, what's the fascination for Australia and how does it respond to what might be a change of administration in Washington? I'm here joined today by, in the studio, which is fantastic, Gideon Rosner on my right, the Director of Policy at the IPA.
Morning, Scott.
It's great to have you, and of course you've been a great guest on the last couple of weeks, making some bold predictions about the election, which we'll be revisiting. I'm also very pleased that we have research fellow Morgan Begg.
Thanks, Scott.
An assiduous follower of US politics, down into the minutiae of various congressional districts. We look forward to some of that. And of course, coming in via Zoom from RMIT University, Dr. Chris Berg.
Thank you, Scott.
Also adjunct fellow at the IPA. Yes, we've been threatening to talk about the US election, and here we are, Chris, on this post-election special, coming to you on Thursdays, as we will be all the way up till Christmas.
We are, and it is slightly more post-election than perhaps we thought last night. So we're recording this, and this becomes really relevant. We're recording this at 11 o'clock on Thursday. It does appear that there are a number of paths for Joe Biden to become the president and fewer paths for Donald Trump to become president. It's looking very much like there'll be a Biden presidency with a Democrat Senate, Biden either popping over the line or winning reasonably comfortably.
Republican Senate.
Republican Senate, my apologies. So Republican Senate, and as you pointed out, also a majority Republican-leaning Supreme Court as well. So why don't we throw initially to Gideon with Gideon's significant and bold predictions. Gideon, what has surprised you about this result or this presumed result?
Well, Chris, I was a strong supporter of Marco Rubio in the 2016 primaries, so I've actually been vindicated, I think, by the result last night. But no, look, in all seriousness, this is probably the most devastating election outcome, certainly that I've seen in my lifetime, certainly the most consequential that I've seen in my lifetime. I still don't understand it. I do not understand how you have somebody who's admittedly controversial, admittedly polarising, but with the American system that depends so much on turnout for somebody with a track record, with genuine achievement, with a huge following, who ran an excellent campaign in the main, lost to the worst presidential ticket since McGovern-Shriver, and the most left-wing presidential ticket since McGovern-Shriver, incidentally, in 1972. This seemed, other than the polls, every other indicator to me was showing, a comfortable win, and I was a bit bolshy in my predictions, as I tend to be. But this is bad. These are bad times now. This was the final show. This was the final showdown. We needed Trumpism such as it is to be cemented. It was the final showdown between the anti-establishment, patriotic, the two Americas. The establishment, the bureaucratic, managerial, woke industrial complex, the expertocracy, all the villains that are the manifestations of the modern nations, or the modern state, versus Middle America and the state one. And I think that's for two reasons. Just I know this is a long answer, but I think the most shocking thing, though, to answer your question, is Biden only ran on two issues. He couldn't run on the economy or anything else. He ran on Orange Man Bad and on Corona. Orange Man Bad brought out the base, sure, but it would not have won in the election. Corona did. And what that tells me is that even the people of the United States of America, the most freedom-loving people, at least in theory, people on the face of the earth, were so terrified by this virus that they cashed in their freedoms for a candidate who firstly can't even tie his shoelaces, but secondly will impose lockdowns, championed lockdowns. That to me is the most surprising thing.
So I understand your point. I don't understand why you would be surprised, though. So what we know from the literature about how elections go is that it tends to be in bad times, they push out incumbents. So it doesn't matter what sort of bad times and why those bad times are.
True.
So there's really good evidence to suggest that if it's raining on a polling day,
Yeah.
the incumbent will lose percentage points. If there's been a natural disaster, the incumbent will lose percentage points. And in this circumstance, it doesn't seem surprising that you would have a global pandemic, regardless of what you think Donald Trump's response was, and he would suffer for it. Any incumbent would suffer for it. So it doesn't seem surprising in any way. I think there are lessons to draw, and you're right to try to start drawing some of them, but it doesn't strike me as a surprise in the slightest. Morgan, why don't we throw you in here? What has surprised you, or do you share my or Gideon's view, or where would you like to go from here?
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. I had anticipated, and maybe I hoped for, a comfortable Trump win, but my confidence interval was right across the board.
It was from 0 to 100.
Yeah, pretty much. What actually did interest me more was the anticipated Biden landslide. There were talks that there would be numerous Senate seats that would be flipping to the Democrats. There'd be I don't know if anyone was talking about how many seats that the Republicans would pick up in the House of Representatives. Republicans picked up another governorship in Montana, I believe. So I think, aside from the top level result, which is still, I still think there's a path for Trump to win. I don't think it's called. I don't think it's safe to assume Biden will win at this stage. So I think there's still a bit of counting to go. I guess
and some court challenges, which may have an influence.
That's right. I think we're definitely going down that route, and it'll be interesting to see. But I was the big one was, of course, there was some talk that the polling companies, the pollsters, that they would have recalibrated their methodology following 2016.
That was your bold prediction, Chris.
Yeah. So we should talk about the polls in a sec.
Yes,
the polls are relevant.
Yeah, and what essentially the errors of the polls have been highlighted again. They were showing big victories for Biden in several of the states, and the actual anticipated result has been either much closer or completely opposite to what they had anticipated. So, we can get into that further, but I thought that was really interesting as well.
We should come back to the polls. I just want to say, Gideon, you were talking about the divisions in America, and I just want to dwell on that for a sec because
it's a worldwide phenomenon, but within America.
Well, this is the thing. This is one of the things that I truly hate about the Democratic talking points and the CNN talking points is this idea that Trump has created these divisions, and that until Trump came on the scene, there were no. America was this beautiful, it was all sunlit uplands, and everyone loved each other. And
Middle America just shut up and took it.
So I come back to
how dare you?
Yeah, I come back to something like Charles Murray's Coming Apart, which we've talked about before. It was on. It's been in the IPA review. That was published in 2012. The highly educated elites. With their intermarriage, graduates of the great schools, coastal, the 5% was Murray's point, that these are the people that are actually running America.
Yeah.
And he looked at the opposite 5%. He literally analysed the opposite 5% demographics, and he pulled out the ethnic class factors, all these sorts of things. So this idea that Trump somehow created this division was a nonsense, and this idea that Biden's going to unite America. Well, what he's done is he's got just enough of one side to win, just as Trump nearly had enough to win. So we should never draw conclusions about what America is simply because the needle just happened to fall just one side of the line. And as Morgan said. We certainly don't have any kind of Biden landslide.
Yep.
So it would have been a lie to say, well, I got over 300 electoral college votes, therefore I have this clear mandate to introduce the full panoply of the Democrat fantasy, which is their platform. And I'm glad I didn't got that, but it would have been a nonsense anyway. Because we're only talking about 500,000 votes either way. So,
but it's also the election result is better. So I had assumed, based on the polls, again we'll talk about the polls in a sec, but based on the polls, I had assumed that it would be a Biden landslide because that's what the polls were saying. In fact, what we've got is a marginal Biden victory that looks like the Midwestern states that went to Trump the last time looks like they're going to Biden this time. And in fact, the most interesting thing and the most important thing then is that the Republicans have kept the Senate. So all the wild lefty policies, the Green New Deal, court packing, all that sort of stuff is going to be held up, if Biden wanted to do them, held up in the Senate. And we're going to get the same logjam that we got under the Obama years. Now, that is actually not a bad outcome, because then we might get the Republicans caring about spending and deficits again, which would be desirable. We might get them worried about shrinking the size of government rather than letting Biden grow the size of government. So I can understand it may not be the best of all possible worlds, but it's not a bad outcome if you assume that there was going to be a Democratic sweep.
No, it's still a pretty bad I think Chris, I can't see anyone in Congress actually speaking up for debts and deficits now.
It's a bad outcome because it's not about the next 4 years and American domestic and foreign policy and things like that. As I said, it is the defeat of Trumpism. It is the defeat of, we needed something we being those on the centre right.
But you've swung from optimism to pessimism. I like our colleague Daniel Wild at CPAC yesterday.
What did he say? I didn't catch it.
Basically, that what we've seen is, just as people talked about Reaganism. Whatever happens with Trump in 2020
they'll
election,
beat the constituency for it.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think it'll win in the end. No, look, don't get me wrong. Hussein Obama had a saying when he said when Trump lost, he said the progress zigzags, but the arc of history bends towards justice. I do believe the arc of history bends towards freedom, but I think it'll take probably longer than my lifetime to restore what we've lost.
The deplorables are not going to be put back into a box.
What I'm getting at is this could have been the knockout blow. This could have said to them, all the things you're saying about Russian collusion and delegitimizing the movement, what happened in 2016, the fact that so many Americans, against all the odds, said, we will not take this anymore. We will not be ruled over by this, the bureaucratic, managerial, woke, self-important elite. That has now been reversed. And maybe it'll come bouncing back when the Harris administration proves to be a complete and utter disaster. But that's what we had. We almost had that final win. And now we'll be struggling against the monstrosity that is the modern day state, certainly for the rest of my lifetime.
Gideon, what hope for a post-Trumpism? What opportunities are there? Do you see?
Oh well, Trumpism. I guess Trumpism is an idea, and Trump is a vehicle for that idea currently. But that idea will persevere. I think. My thoughts are conflicted on the question. I'm trying to picture exactly how that idea can win again in the face of so much, and I'll call it corruption. Like the media corruption, the establishment, the established interests. Think in 2020 we had the foot soldiers of the Democratic Party on the streets in the cities, putting a gun to the heads of the Americans, saying, "Give us control of the country, or we burn down the cities." And it worked. I don't know how do you overcome that? That's a really tough question.
And just while you're still gathering your thoughts, I love the narrative that in cities like New York they were boarding up their stores against the riot that was going to follow a Trump victory, and somehow this was Trump's fault. I mean, that takes some doing.
Because he created divisions, Scott.
He created those divisions.
He upset the woke people. I mean,
it's extraordinary. And just think on the election night coverage how none of the news stations were prepared to admit when Trump had won a state. Like it took them hours to concede that Florida had gone to Trump. They were paving the way for some other option to come forward. I don't.
Even Fox News.
And then Chris, you were talking about the
Fox
reaction.
News was called Arizona, probably prematurely.
The reaction to Trump's speech, Chris, was also illustrative of what was going on.
That's right. So for those who may not have seen, of course, Donald Trump. In fact, first Joe Biden stood up and said that we believe we are winning at something like 1:30 in the morning US time, and then half an hour later, I'm making these things up, maybe at 2 a.m. in the morning, Donald Trump stood up and foreshadowed many of the claims of fraud and said we have won. Now, what struck me is not. I actually think there were some pretty serious mistakes made in that speech. But what really struck me and what I did want to talk about is the pre-rebuttal that was going on. So I was watching CNN. Yes. I was switching between lots of channels. But at the time I was watching CNN. And CNN was trying to rebut his claims of fraud before he had made them in the speech. And Donald Trump is widely expected to say that this election has been stolen, which it absolutely has not. Let's wait it out, shall we? Let's at least see what he says. Now, I think that what Trump said was very Trumpy and was probably a pretty significant mistake, especially if he does want to challenge these things in court. But having said that, there's something that we've talked about for a long time, right, Scott? We've talked about the way the media thinks of itself these days as having a unique responsibility to tell us the truth as it sees, rather than just report the story. And I've been so bothered by this idea that people have been throwing around in media land and on Twitter that they shouldn't even air what the president says, because that would be irresponsible not to air the claims from the president of the United States. Mate, he's the president.
And what they're actually reporting, on is the story that Trump has used his remaining time as commander-in-chief to call out the army to suspend democracy and the Constitution in America and appoint himself president for life. That's been their narrative for the last 6 months. And they're essentially framing his speech around that narrative and saying this proves our point. My God, he's going to use the courts to dispute ballots, which is what's provided for in legislation.
Which is fine, and asking for a recount and all that sort of stuff. But Trump walks into this, right? I don't know that he always knows what he says, but he just says whatever's on his mind. And he says, there was definitely fraud. Well, this is for the courts to find out. And, if you want to challenge things in the courts, have that happen. So my only point is that the media on one side and Trump on the other side, they work each other into a lather just as much as one is to blame.
Look, I have to say, though, this whole thing about Trump making a speech and saying we think we've won and everything else, and I've been paid out on Twitter for this because Biden started it. Biden went to, it was a very provocative thing for Biden to do. He addressed himself. It's, fun fact, by the way, no losing Democratic presidential candidate has conceded on the night since 1988, which would tell you something. But more to the point, he if you're going to say, okay, it's still, we're not going to know tonight, do what, send out Kamala Harris to say, we're not conceding yet, we fought long and hard, et cetera, like John Edwards did in 2000, or send out, what's his name, like Hillary Clinton did, to come out and say, we think we're winning. That's as bad as saying we've won this election. That's as bad as declaring victory prematurely. They obviously did it because they thought that's what Trump would do, but that was very opportunistic and very cynical as well. I don't think we should be hanging on Trump over this. He just fights harder than the useless idiots from the Republican Party have fought for the last 20 years. But he has to, because look what he's up against.
Oh, look, it's such a prissy prissy sort of narrative of this pure form of democracy that America is supposed to have had. I mean, these are always incredibly tightly fought things, and of course, voting is only part of the system. The courts are part of the system, the electoral college is part of the system, and at every turn there's this sort of delegitimisation of it, frankly, of anything that might favour Trump.
It's terrible strategy. It's terrible strategy for one particular reason. What he's doing, and he's done this in a number of other court cases, he's made prejudicial comments that the courts have then been able to turn around and say, well, Donald Trump said this, so therefore you can't make that claim in court because you're the person who's bringing the action has stated otherwise than your legal claim. So if he wants to challenge these in courts, as is right, and in many cases should be, and I am thinking about the Pennsylvania situation, which there is actually like really legitimate things to be discussed and disputed in court, then it's very easy for justices to either delay the hearing or just to it gives them an excuse to do so, or just point out any prejudicial things he said. It's just bad strategy. So I get, Gideon, that yes, he fights, but sometimes his fighting is counterproductive to his interest.
Oh, look, it's crash or crash through, but I think he's over his very, very short political career has racked up more wins than losses. I mean, his track record shows. I mean, I'll put it this way: President Cruz couldn't have gotten Brett Kavanaugh up. President Cruz couldn't have pulled out of Paris even if he wanted to. His combativeness, it's not everybody likes it, but it gets results. And but apparently, bringing millions of Americans back into work, reviving whole communities, that's not as important as a bit of foul language on Twitter.
Sure. So I should take my blame, or not my blame. I should embarrass myself as well. So in the last episode, people will remember that we were going around the table, asking everybody how much percentage chance do you think Donald Trump had versus Joe Biden. I think Andrew Bushnell said something like 30%. Scott, forgive me if I can't remember exactly how many percentage.
About 40%, yeah.
I said 11% chance, and I was basing that entirely on the 538, so Nate Silver's famous poll aggregator, where he weights polls. He aggregates the polls and then weights them by what he views as quality. The polls were way, way, way off, and as I think Gideon and Morgan, you've pointed out, in some cases, in Florida, for instance, where it looked like Biden was up 3, in fact, turns out that Biden was down 3. Wisconsin, which has crept over the line for Biden. Of course, we'd had polls from Wisconsin saying that Biden was up 7, up 10. There was a plus 17 poll just a couple of weeks ago. And the question is, so if we can't trust polls, if we can't use polls as any guide to what the electorate is thinking, how can we assess what the electorate is thinking at any given moment? And Gideon, we've had this conversation a couple of times, but I don't know that we can replace it with yard signs or the number of people who turn up at Trump rallies.
Or biscuit sales at a Pennsylvania cafe.
Are we lost with no information, or?
I guess so. Look, I'd call me old-fashioned.
This is the nihilistic answer. This is just like no one knows.
Look, I saw that line from Brett Sutton.
But are they broken? I mean, even in your time in more political roles, government roles. I mean, just with changes in technology, the whole idea of telephone polling or going around with clipboards. I mean, what world are we in now? Is it worth paying any attention to them at all?
I wouldn't say in Australia, certainly, because it's difficult to get, purchase mobile data and things like that, and very few people have landlines anymore. And I think that it's difficult. Look, call me old-fashioned. I think the best way to find out what the electorate is thinking is for politicians to talk to their constituents. I think, and this is actually why what will happen on social media with their ongoing censorship will be so that'll be the most divisive thing at all, because people, the Trump won in 2016 because there was a huge segment of the American population that didn't feel listened to. If they are blocked or prevented from at least ventilating their opinions on, what is the 21st century's public square, then they're going to go somewhere else, and hopefully they will come out of their hidey hole in 4 years' time and belt the Democrats back to the Stone Age. The question is, who'll be on the ticket? Will it be somebody good, or will we go back? And this is the question about segueing into, I guess, what we should talk about next, which is the future of the Republican Party and the right. Will Trumpism survive, or will we just go back to boring ineffectual nobodies like Jeb Bush?
So I want to ask Gideon and Morgan, you might have a view on this. What do we mean by Trumpism in that sense? So obviously, let's assume that Trump doesn't run in 2024, which is hardly a guarantee. But what do we mean by Trumpism? Is Trumpism an effect, or is it a set of policy choices? Because I'm very uncomfortable, as you know, with many of the policy choices. So the anti-trade stuff.
As am I might add. Yeah.
So what is it that we mean by Trumpism, and what is it that we want to recover from the Trump presidency, and what might we want to discard?
I think it's a skepticism about state control and state power. And you're right. It's a good question, though, Chris, in a sense, because one point I've made is that the left are always talking about coalition building. They're saying we need to build a coalition, and generally they're talking about ethnic minorities and unionists or something like that. Trump is the best coalition builder we've ever seen in political history. If you're watching the convention, he brought together so many disparate groups, whether it be Maine lobster fishermen, religious leaders, frankly libertarians like myself, who again don't. I take issue with plenty of his decisions, but I love him because of the success he's had in red tape, in tax, in political correctness, in free speech. Give or take. I know that the ideas about big tech regulation, might cause a bit of disagreement there. But yeah, but it is also a mentality. It is this idea. No, I'm not going to apologise for a stupid joke I made at a rally. I'm not going to say, oh well, I'm sorry for it. No, I'm not going to. I'm not going to talk about things through your frame. It's this idea that, and this is why I'm so disappointed, because I wanted the precedent that a candidate could say what he was thinking, could be upfront, be direct, not just oppose political correctness, but crap on it and win anyway. And that just doesn't look like it's the precedent has been cemented.
So I'll just add another dimension to what Gideon's saying. And for me, a part of Trumpism is about prioritising the place of the working class within the wider market economy, and this is recognising that there's a place for factories and factory workers in a 21st century Western economy. That are, these kinds of jobs don't need to be outsourced if we can avoid it. So we can, as you were saying, we can cut taxes, we can cut red tape, we can make it possible so that businesses can stay in America or in the West,
rather than shunting everybody into green jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
Morgan,
government jobs.
Morgan, isn't then that a vision of the future dispute within the Republican Party? Because I think around this table we would all agree that low taxes and deregulation are desirable, and the outcome of that would be more productive activity in the United States. But in fact, the other part of that policy suite is the tariffs, and is the idea that you can use trade policy to bring those factories back, or at least tax goods from outside the country. Is that the dispute, and where do we think that the Republican Party will end up?
Well, one thing I'll say is I think the Republican Party does. Look, trade is an issue that everybody on the right we need to have a long think about, because I'm a free trader and I don't like a lot of the Trump protectionist streak and the vibe, but I don't think the fear, and this is I didn't support Trump until he was elected, but I don't think the fear of tariff barriers coming up and the drawbridge coming up was borne out in reality. I think that there was a renegotiation of NAFTA and its replacement with another deal and there was sure a trade war with China, but I won't begrudge. I don't support trade wars and those sort of mechanisms to bring factories back or anything like that, but to ensure that the rules-based order when it comes to global trade is working as it should, and to make sure that dishonest, nefarious actors like China can't take advantage of trade rules. I absolutely think, in hindsight, looking back, I had a road to Damascus on that. I think it's a bit of a fiction that free trade agreements are completely open and free trade. I think there are lousy deals. We do need to make sure that the free trade agreements are negotiated are ones that are going to be as free as possible in the first instance, but failing that, rules that will benefit Australian citizens.
You can't jump from Trumpism as an affect, where a really big part of that affect was we've got to stop outsourcing our jobs. We're going to finally we're going to turn free trade into fair trade, while simultaneously claiming that Trump has a really technical issue with trade agreements as written. So and I don't disagree with the things that you've said. I'm just interested to see that it's these sorts of conversations that will determine what direction the Republican Party goes. I think it's also really, really important too, without jumping too much across topics, it's also really, really important to point out that the Trumpism that we saw, Donald was completely disinterested. There was a lack of interest in caring about spending and debt and deficits and all that sort of thing.
To be fair, I agree with you, and I think that certainly his championing of Corona stimulus payments and everything else, is not something that I go along with. But to be fair, he did take a pretty ambitious tax cut budget to Congress, and the brains trust from the Republican Party blocked that. So I think that it's not quite. It's a bit more nuanced than that. But I agree. It wasn't. But that's a Republican thing, though. Dick Cheney said deficits don't matter.
Yeah, I'm going to pick it up, but we'll go to Morgan first, and then I've got a point about trade that I want to come back to.
Sure. Oh well, this might fit in then. So I was just thinking, what is the more permanent change that Trump has brought, or Trumpism has brought to the Republican Party? And I think that the traditional economic model pre-2016, which was high domestic taxes and regulations and no complete exposure to international competition, was a combination which, and I think they're recognising this. This was a combination which routed Middle America, rural America, parts of America which have just been completely gutted. And I think the belief in that traditional economic model, which was completely mainstream in the Republican Party, I think that has changed, and I think there's a recognition that even if Trumpism itself isn't the solution, that there needs to be a solution to that combination. So.
I got two things on that. The first is, I wouldn't overstate the extent to which tariffs have been part of the Trumpism. So part of the actual revival of actual employment, actual manufacturing, has been competitiveness. And we should never forget that America is still the gold standard for actually knowing how to do stuff. The engine of innovation, their ability to run, massive factories with massive workforces, deliver global products. There's a reason why they lead the world in a whole range of things. Like
for now,
I've seen estimates of productivity which say that Americans on average are about 40% more productive than Australians. So we should never. So things like tax cuts, investment allowances, what they opened up in terms of manufacturing, I think that will be a lingering legacy. But look, the other thing about trade, because we can't make the narrative all about Trump. What Trump did was call out China and the WTO, and we now live in a world where every other nation in the world that's not affiliated with China, and there's not too many of those, by the way, is now saying the same thing. So Europe went from, oh my God, Trump, you vandal, you're destroying the WTO and these lovely rules that we've established, to, actually the guy has a point.
Yeah.
The last time the Chinese foreign minister went to Europe a few months ago, expecting to be feted and to be welcomed and everyone to agree what a orange man bad. What he actually got was a very stern talking to from previously supine Brussels and European diplomats. So the world has completely changed, and I think that in many ways is more important than tariffs per se. It's about China's role in the global order, but it's also why I think this conversation and a lot of the media conversations are a little bit delusional, because we talk about, how does it change an administration? What will Biden do? Americans will be reacting, I think. The thing that worries me about the weakness of Biden, literally senility and the weakness of the administration and potentially gridlock, is they will actually be reacting to events. I think this actually gives the because Trump, the thing about his conscious lunacy is you never know which way he's going to jump on something. And in the Westphalian multi-power world that we live in, that was actually an advantage. You put Biden in the White House, I think the Chinese are going to run rings around him.
I think he'll probably have a stroke or something before his inauguration, so I don't think Biden will end up in the White House. I'm amazed he made it to polling day.
No.
I've lost money on bets of other nominees because I didn't think he'd make it.
Well, it's like the president who got a cold on his inauguration day and then promptly died.
Is that right?
Yeah, was it Harrison?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't the cold. It was the COVID.
One for the anoraks.
On the off chance Biden makes it to his inauguration, what do you think that this means? I might throw to you first, Morgan. What do you think that this means for Australia? We've had a tense and friendly relationship with the Trump administration, variously, which we might sheet away to different prime ministers, but certainly in recent years we've been quite close to the Trump administration. What do you think that this means for Australia's position in the world? Our economic relationship? Where do you think we go from here?
Well, my first instinct is that the political class, by and large, in Canberra will be ecstatic if it's a Biden presidency. I think this is their dreams come true. I think the Australian government in its diplomatic relations with the US will be much more giving, much more willing to play ball with what the Americans would want. That's just my instinct. I'm not a diplomatic expert. It may play out completely differently, but that's just I think that's just my sense of it. Yeah.
Gideon.
Well, our most important ally is going to be weakened. As Scott said, it's going to be change the power dynamics between the world's existing superpower and the world's rival superpower, and Australia will be collateral damage in a lot of that. I think we should all start learning Mandarin and liquidating our assets, putting them into Bitcoin, and waiting for the Australian dollar to not be worth the paper it's printed on.
That's a good point, Gideon.
The price of Bitcoin is doing really, really well during this. So of course, I hadn't been following the US election very closely yesterday. I was mainly just tracking the Bitcoin price, and it was doing...
Is it worth buying more, Chris?
Look, it might be a bit high, but I'm not your financial advisor.
Listeners should be advised to seek their own advice. Morgan.
I'd add to what Gideon said. He said it was very good. That the Trump administration has, I believe, given cover to the Australian government to be more honest about Chinese influence in Australia. Now, with the change, if there's a change in administration, how does that affect our behaviour in respect to Chinese influence?
It's an interesting one, right?
I'm very worried.
Because you've gotten... So to the extent that Trump started the conversation about China and started a pushback, and that did affect the Australian government and the way we thought about it, well, that's already begun now, right? So we're in this situation that we've got these unofficial trade barriers between China and Australia at the moment. They're preventing us exporting some really key goods like lobsters and various things that are really critical for us. So that trade war, that contest has already begun. Now the test will be, how does the Biden administration, does it just pursue the existing Trump strategy? Does it try to roll everything back in something that may not be able to be rolled back? Do we continue with it? Does China not care about the change in administration? That's a really interesting, pivotal moment. That this battle may have already... You can't stop a battle once it's started.
Yeah, and this is the thing. And to what I was saying before, this idea that Trump was on his own on China, like let there be no doubt that this is bipartisan in America. At the strategic geopolitical level, the Democrats are just as focused on China's behaviour, its rise, its competitive threat. But what I'm very unconvinced about is their capacity to actually translate that into any kind of action. So they, I wouldn't expect much change in the outlook from America. But to Morgan's point, when the Prime Minister of Australia or the Prime Minister of Japan, or someone out of the Philippines or Singapore is thinking of saying something critical about China, do they know that America has their back? Yeah. We've just had Pompeo do this, whistle stop all around the Indo-Pacific region to shore up, the coalition essentially against China. Not everyone played ball. Australia's rhetoric is nowhere near as anti-China as intense as Pompeo would have liked, but that's what it was about. So Biden, I don't think is going to repudiate that. But I just don't see them prosecuting any kind of a strategy. And
what do they care? I mean,
they care. Their constituency cares.
Yeah,
but
I'll put it this way, Scott. Though, what happens when next time an NBA player wants to say something about Uyghur Muslims and gets held down and censored by the NBA because they're worried about losing lucrative China deals? Is there going to be somebody like Trump sticking up for the truth on China? I don't think so. They'll be swayed by the swampocracy and say, "Oh, fair enough. No, you got to look after."
Because you're always avoiding divisions, aren't you?
Yeah, got to bring the country together.
It's about uniting everyone and making the world a peaceful place by not rocking the boat.
Yes. Correct. Under our new Chinese overlords.
Well,
at least the food will be good.
And they're in the same time zone. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what happens to the coronavirus pandemic, Gideon?
That's the other thing. I mean, this was. It's been such an awful year in terms of public policy, but this would have vindicated it. This would have been somebody who literally said, "Don't let the virus control your life. We don't want to lose jobs over this." And he's been defeated. As I said, Biden turned into a referendum on the coronavirus, and this fear, this sub-rational paranoia that has swept the world, even in the United States, was a factor. And we have to ask ourselves what the next panic is. And I'm sorry to say, as soon as this, after 5 more years of stage 1, COVID normal in 2 or 3 years, we'll be hearing about the climate scare again. And the Harris administration will by that point be pumping trillions of dollars into the Green New Deal. But what's going to happen to the coronavirus? Yeah, it's a victory for lockdowns. It's a victory for government coercion. It's a victory for the idea that the government's role is to keep us safe by micromanaging the minutiae of human behaviour, and that's perfectly fine and that's perfectly acceptable. That was on the ballot, and again, in the most freedom-loving nation on the planet.
Yeah, so health fascism wins.
Yeah,
Chris, we're probably almost at that part where we're making closing remarks. Something we didn't get to in the show is perhaps the vindication of Trumpism that will come out of the vote is this idea that this has been 4 years of a white supremacist government.
Yeah,
and
so that's right.
That whole trope that only white, uneducated, working class people in West Virginia vote for Trump. And I even had a good, intelligent lefty mate say to me, he said, "Oh, well, it'll be good for the Republicans when Trump's out of the road because then they can actually start once again building their links to the Hispanic community." And I'm like, what are you talking about? They're going to win Florida. They're doing great.
They didn't put on parades in the middle of Miami for Mitt Romney.
Exactly.
Which is incredibly interesting and incredibly significant. So the results, as far as we can tell, suggest that Trump has actually made inroads in a number of minority groups, especially Latinos, but also in some groups of Black Americans and so forth. And what that does tell you, or I think we can assume that the identity politics first model of that many on the left have been pushing just does not sell to the very communities that it's supposed to be about, or at least it doesn't sell in the way that they think they do. You cannot simultaneously pretend to be representing minority communities while they're voting against that representation. And now that has huge implications for Australia. That has huge implications for the way we think about identity politics and politics in general. But this idea that we're in this post-materialist environment, what Morgan, your point, that we do have to think, or the Republicans need to keep front in mind the idea of a working class, the idea of industry, all that sort of thing. We do need to care about, and the Democrats and the left need to care about material outcomes, and people ultimately vote on the basis of the economy. They do vote on the basis of prosperity. They don't vote on the basis of academic theory about intersectionality, as fascinating as I'm sure that is.
I don't know. I think when people don't have anything else to lose, they might get taken in by this idea that they're poor and oppressed and miserable because they're black and there's systemic racism. I think that might actually take hold. I think we're stuck with identity politics now. I really do.
No,
it's entrenched.
It's a victory for the old Marxism against the new Marxism. I mean, people are voting with their material interests, and there's an overlap as well, isn't there, Morgan, with values as well. That these are, we've seen it in some African American communities, which are focused on conservative values, personal responsibility, family values. Certainly in the Latino communities, it's a combination of voting for your true class interest. Why are you going to listen to someone who is a professor at Yale yelling at you about intersectional politics, or some woke fruitcake from a privileged college, when you can actually be saying, well, I've got to vote according to my life as it is, and the values of the people around me. So that's the lasting legacy, and that's why the GOP they actually did all right, and won some key state contests as well. Any other closing remarks, Morgan?
I haven't lost hope.
It could happen. Yes, that's right. Yes.
It could happen. It could happen.
Yeah.
I have been watching the results while we've been talking, and neither way so far. But
okay.
There is a look, Morgan. There is definitely a path. Yeah. It's just a very narrow.
And this is, of course, a product of this podcast is a product of the Institute of Public Affairs. If you're not already a member, do go to ipa.org.au and see how you can join or donate and support our programming and research, including tomorrow, Gideon, you're back in the studio, I
Yes,
believe.
the IPA with you. We'll also be taking a look at the Trump election, and I'll be elaborating on this idea that it was a referendum on corona and what that means.
And if by a miracle it happens, you'll be able to say, Morgan called it.
Yeah.
there is a path.
I'll split my sports bets winnings with you, Morgan.
So please do come back to the IPA with you, hosted by Gideon Rosner, tomorrow, Friday. And in the meantime, we have come to that part of the show where we just change gears a little bit and talk about what we've been reading, watching, and listening to. We have 3 wonderful nominations today. I'm actually just going to pass. I'm a bit cooked on it.
Oh, you're cooked out, are you?
Yes.
You weren't reading a novel in the middle of the US election campaign?
No, I think 3's plenty. Chris, would you like to lead us off?
I'll kick off. So I watched The Queen's Gambit, which is a Netflix TV show about a young woman who becomes a chess grandmaster during the Cold War. Now, the thing that I have to say about that is, during COVID, we have all watched a lot of Netflix. And as I've been talking about TV shows, I've been saying, this show isn't bad. This show is adequate. Here's something. But The Queen's Gambit is genuinely excellent. It is really very good. It reminds us what prestige television actually is, of the sort of quality that we were getting well before the coronavirus pandemic. The lead actor, whose name escapes me, is fantastic. It is a riveting story about a young woman who it becomes both excellent in her field and has drug and alcohol addictions as well. It doesn't always go the direction that you will think it goes, but it is just stunning acting, beautifully shot, wonderful theme. They even managed to do the chess scenes very well and even quite fresh. Some people have said that it drags on a bit. It probably could have lost 1 or 2 episodes at the end there, but I didn't mind because we've got to keep watching something, don't we? It is really genuinely very, very good.
Yeah, I caught a couple of episodes. The actress is Anya Taylor-Joy. She's certainly striking looking, a very good actress from what I saw. And I should mention that in 2016 she was in a movie called Morgan.
Oh, of course.
Oh, there you go.
So you need to get onto
Tune
that.
into that one, Morgan.
Mr. B. How about you, Morgan?
It's shocking, Chris, that you said that a Netflix show would be criticised for dragging on. That's
I know. I really wanted to just break a surprise.
2020 has been the year of seeking whatever form of escapism in a diminishing range of entertainment media that are available to us. Everything's been closed down, so we're stuck in our houses. We're limited to streaming, reading books, and playing video games. And it's in that context that I've been become quite interested in the history, the development of the video game industry, and so I've started watching a documentary on Netflix, a documentary series, I think 6 episodes, called High Score. And it's pretty basic. It charts, the early arcade days, the home console era, beginning in the 80s with Nintendo, the console wars of the 90s, violence and the legal troubles in the 90s as well, and then the sort of the esports era, which is taking place now. I find it fascinating, especially the early decades from the 70s to the 90s. The video game industry was kind of like a wild west. Just lots of innovation, throwing ideas at the wall, seeing what stuck. Yeah. I love the console wars. This was Nintendo had the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and the Sega had the Sega Genesis, or as we had, the Sega Mega Drive. And Sega, they had a hardcore advertising campaign. They would bag out Nintendo. They had guerrilla marketing. They'd have people, they'd have these guys and they'd carry around a Sega Genesis console and they'd go around to university campuses and go into dorms and frat houses and like show off and play and then go to the next campus. It was awesome. And then unfortunately, Sega ended up losing and they stopped making consoles. But
their last one was the Dreamcast.
The Dreamcast,
that
unfortunately.
Bombed. Yeah. And then they got, I guess, cannibalized a bit by Microsoft with the Xbox.
Exactly.
And Sony, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
But isn't it odd that there's this 2-player war, and they're obviously vying for a monopoly. But now we're, as far as I'm aware,
most consoles are 4-player,
where we've got 3 standard platforms.
Yep.
So you've got PlayStations, you've got Xboxes, and you've got Nintendos, and the Nintendo Switch.
Yep.
That seem to be selling to different markets.
Yeah, somewhat. So to put my cards on the table, Xbox doesn't sell in Japan, for instance. Like that is only Sega versus Nintendo, but Xbox is much more successful in the American market. But and the Nintendo Switch in itself is like it's like a completely different kind of technology.
Yeah, what is the Switch? I've never figured that out. Well, is it a console or a handheld?
It's both. It's meant to be. It's like a blended format.
Yeah, it comes apart.
Oh, that's awesome. So you can take it on the road with you when you.
And it's nice. We've got teenage girls.
So my family.
So it's a Switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Nintendo after the console wars. So the thing that the outcome of the console wars for Nintendo was that they became like the family company.
Yeah.
Sony, Microsoft, they pursued like the gamer market and the mainstream gamers, but Nintendo sort of operate solely in this family gamer market. So that's probably what a lot of people have been playing this year.
So we bought a Nintendo Switch for the kids during
exactly.
COVID, I never had one as a kid, and I was not going to buy one until a global pandemic sent everybody to work from home.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is in the last, I'd say, 20 years, as video gaming has become more mainstream, it's just going to become bigger. It's going to be bigger than movies. So I think knowing the history of it, I think is very interesting to me, and it should be of interest to anyone who has any kind of interest in how people are spending their time, how people are wasting their time.
So that's High Score, and it's on Netflix. Another Netflix one. How about you?
So, Morgan, as Morgan said, it's we're trying to amuse ourselves with increasingly limited media of entertainment, and in that spirit, I, for whatever reason, have started watching reruns of the old show Seventh Heaven, which was a show that ran from the late 90s until around the mid-2000s, and basically... I can't believe I'm talking about this, but it's a bit of nostalgia for me, because I did watch it when I was a kid. As I said, it was sort of early 2000s, and the premise is a Protestant minister and his wife, and they live in a house that the church owns, and they have 5 kids. And often this bloke's out helping some charity case with a particular problem, so they explore an issue half the time, and hijinks ensue, and often it's used to relate it's not expressly Christian. It very rarely mentions God or it never mentions Jesus or anything like that, but it does talk about family. It's got and Christian ethics and values without expressly naming them. And a few reflections just watching the show in the year 2020 as a 33-year-old, because I clearly too much time on my hands. Firstly, it's a very addictive show. I understand why I watched it when I was younger. They did have a really good writer on the show, and it did have some good storylines. I can't believe that it was mainstream at the time, and it was. Like, the Olsen twins went on it, and Ashley Simpson was on a star in it, and the values and everything else expressed on it. The championing of the abstinence, for example, it was very expressly pro-abstinence. It was very anti-alcohol even. It was very... And yet it was all accepted at the time. I don't think a show like that could be made, or certainly wouldn't be made mainstream. And it also made me wonder, the Camden family in this show, what would they be like today? Who would they have voted for? Would they have been under... Would they be Democrats? They struck me as mildly notionally Democratic on the show, and one of the lead actors has since gone on to participate in women's marches or so on. But would they be Democrats today? Would they be welcome in the Democratic Party, or would Reverend Camden be voting for Trump because the Black Lives Matter people were trying to burn down his church? I don't know.
They'd be so Trump.
Anyway, so I'm glad I've watched it. It's a bit of fun, and it just shows how the mores and the Overton window in terms of social issues has shifted.
Yeah, you wouldn't see it today.
No, you wouldn't.
That's an amazing pick. You never cease. You never cease to surprise, Gideon. I must say.
Yeah, well, but that's the final point I make, and you're right, Morgan, though, because there's a lot of disagreement around this place about social issues, and to varying degrees. Some of us are more personally conservative, some of us are much less, bordering on libertinism. But I don't think that, you couldn't have a discussion about those. That wouldn't be mainstream content. It's just so outside the realm of even the possibility of discussing things with this genuinely Christian outlook. It's a relic from a bygone era. And I, frankly, again, much as I am not a particularly conservative person personally, I think we're actually poorer for it, for having lost that.
Well said. That's right, because it's still half the country, and who knows, it could actually make product for it. No, thank you, Gideon, and thank you for those 3 very interesting picks. You've been listening to Looking Forward, which is a product of the IPA. Please do go to our website, get around us. If you're listening on a podcast platform, please take this opportunity to make sure you're subscribed and to give us a rating, preferably a very high one. I'd like to say a big thank you to our panellists today, Morgan Begg.
Thanks, Scott.
Chris Berg.
Thank you.
And Gideon Rosner. Don't forget, Gideon will be back in the studio tomorrow for the IPA with you. Big thank you to Josh in the studio. I've been Scott Hargraves, editor of the IPA Review, and we'll be back with more next week.